Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 24th of June, can I refer members to section 2 on page 4 of their papers? Are members content with the minutes, that they're a true reflection? Okay, thank you. Moving on to matters arising, I would refer members to section 3 on page 8 of their papers. I have 3 matters under matters arising. First of all, I want to inform members that the date of the one Assembly Party response has been received. To date, only one Assembly Party response has been received. The Committee Secretariat has emailed the other party officers to remind them of this, and the Secretariat has sent out a further reminder and asked members to encourage their parties to respond as soon as possible. Members will find in their packs that there's some additional information from Professor Galligan of Queen's University, and that can be found at section 3.1 on pages 11 to 13. There also was to be a visit next week, I think, of Dame Rosemary Butler from the Welsh Assembly in relation to the topic that we're handling. Given the Speaker's illness and the fact that some members will be away next week, that will not now take place and it will be rescheduled for a later date. Okay.
Yes, inform members that
this here.
Yes.
Yeah. Moving on, it was agreed at the meeting of the 24th of June to invite Mrs Jane Morris as the former MLA and Deputy Speaker to give evidence at this meeting, along with Anne McVicker of the Women's Resource and Development Agency, on the challenges and barriers faced by women in politics. Anne McKeever will present to the committee in a few minutes. Unfortunately, Ms Morris is unable to attend today but has agreed to come to the committee meeting on the 7th of October. Can I refer members to section 4, pages 17 to 21 of their papers for the end of session report. The end of session report for the Assembly and Executive Review Committee for the period September 13 to August 14 can be found at section 4, pages 70 to 21 for the committee to approve for inclusion on our webpage. This is a factual report of the committee's key review activities during this period. Are members content to approve the report? Sorry, you want to bring the clerk in at this point?
Yes, on page 3 of that report there's a typographical error, and we've restructured the sentence to read: on the 25th of March 2014 the committee engaged with political parties of the Assembly to identify their views on priority issues for future reviews by AARC. And there's one other typo there on that page, which we will amend.
Okay, thank you. Members content? Yep. Table today are members' attendance figures for the 1st of September 13 to 31st of August 14, which will also be published on our website. If members have any issues with that, could they contact the Secretariat as soon as is possible? Okay, today we have a briefing then from Anne McVicker, who is the Director of the Women's Resource and Development Agency, which supports women's groups and organisations with training and campaigning on key issues which affect women here. Ms McVicker is accompanied by Lynn Carville, Chief Executive Women's Tech, and Ms Annie Campbell, Director of Women's Aid Federation, Northern Ireland. Included in members' packs at page 23 to 27 is a briefing paper and the extract from the call for evidence paper submitted by the Women's Resource and Development Agency. Can I remind members that Hansard will be present to record this session. At this point, I'd like to welcome Ms McVicker, Ms Carville and Ms Campbell to make their presentation. After the presentation, members will have an opportunity to ask questions. Ladies, can I apologise at the outset that unfortunately I have to leave. I have another event upstairs, but the Deputy Chair will take over. Okay, thank you very much. Feel free to go ahead and begin whenever you're.
Thank you very much for the invitation. We're here today and representing the views of WRDA's membership, which stands at over 800, and representative of the Women's Consortium, which is made up of Training for Women Network, the the Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network, Foyle Women's Information Network, Women's Tech and Women's Support Network, and it's also reflective of the Women's Ad Hoc Policy Group. In terms of getting more women into politics in the Assembly, it would be, it's often been cited that the traditional barriers have been childcare, lack of affordable and accessible childcare, the fact that women are seen as carers, so that they would take a step back during their careers to look after children, a lack of confidence because they've maybe been out of the workforce for a while, and also the fact that there's continuing employment discrimination. But really key is that the culture of politics is seen as problematic to many women. As it's often male, often maybe seen as aggressive and adversarial. Given the experience of politics over the past years, it's felt that much of politics is about playing games. And many women simply do not like this. And consequently, they are more likely to get involved in community action and development rather than formal political life or related decision-making agencies. What we feel is needed is that there needs to be more female role models in political life, and having more women in politics would make politics more inclusive and transparent. In fact, one of the examples given is that the important contribution offered in Ireland by having 2 women presidents was cited as a very positive example, and also some of the mechanisms that exist in the Scottish and the Welsh assemblies, which have brought more women into politics. We feel that there needs to be a commitment to increase the number of women in political and public life, and this should be stated in the programme for government and complemented in a range of measurable actions. Actions by governments and political parties in Northern Ireland should tackle the underrepresentation of women and build women's leadership and visibility to enrich democracy, policy debate and decision making. We need to ensure that when considering strategies to increase representation of women in politics, that this should apply to all women, including representation from women from culturally diverse backgrounds, as well as disadvantaged communities. And that within 5 years, measures should be put in place to provide for a significant increase in the number of women in political parties in the Assembly. We also think that the civic forum, as provided for in the Good Friday Agreement, should be restored with gender-balanced representation. And I'd like now to invite Lynn and Annie to contribute here.
Thank you very much. I suppose there's a couple of points that I would like to raise to the committee, and some of this maybe outside the remit of this committee and the Assembly, but they're very important just in terms of recognising the barriers that face women. I've worked previous to this position as a lobbyist for WRDA for 5 years and worked with women politicians up here and worked to support them. And what was very clear to me at that time was that candidate selection is actually a huge barrier in terms of getting women into politics. It really does matter who is on the ballot paper. And in the 2011 Assembly election, we had 5 constituencies in Northern Ireland that only had 1 woman on the ballot paper, and we had 1 constituency, Newry and Armagh, that had none. So when the electorate are faced with this, really they don't have a diverse choice in terms of who to vote for. Another issue I would like to raise is in terms of a very successful and well-attended conference that WRDA ran in 2011 entitled How to Elect More Women in Northern Ireland, and I think one of the members, Paula, spoke at that conference, and it was a very in-depth look at how, again, what are the barriers to women and how we get women to run. And one of the things that I thought that was very, that really struck me coming across at that was that every single MLA at that conference said that they were asked by someone in their political party to run. Men are asked between 1 and 2 times before they decide to say yes. Women are asked between 5 and 10 times before they decide to say yes. So there's very simple things that political parties can actually do in terms of actually go and ask. There's an effort that needs to come from that end. In terms of good practice, and I'll leave it to my colleague Annie to talk about positive action, I would like to suggest that there are some things that this Assembly could potentially do to enhance the situation. And one is having a gender action plan across the Assembly. What has proven to work in the past is also resourced training for female MLAs and potential female MLAs. And this happened in the 1990s, I believe, when Democracy delivered training. But it was, again, something that, I believe that MLAs themselves said was very successful in getting people and women into the Assembly. We need to do more work in terms of attracting young women. And last year, WRD, along with Politics Plus, organised the Young Women's Pop-Up Political Academy, and I know another member here spoke at that. Very successful, where we got young women from schools in to try and enthuse them about politics. But there needs to be maybe a jump made there in terms of linking that up with political parties. And I would really advocate something in terms of, this is probably not in terms, but in terms of equality law and legislation, there is no paid parental leave for anyone in this Assembly, and that would be something that, if that could be brought in, would be something that would be good. And I would also advocate for job sharing for MLAs. And if you want to diversify the representation of the Assembly, I think that is one way that you could move forward. I can't say that how we're in terms of the legally how that's worked out, but I think it would be something that would really, really work. And finally, before I pass on to my colleague, I would like to say, and just to note this, when I left my job as lobbyist, what became very, very clear to me was the pressure and expectation that half of the community in Northern Ireland actually have on the women who are here. The female MLAs are here, deal with everything that all the men deal with, but there is an extra pressure in terms of what women expect of them, and I think that has to be something that is noted and just noted at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning. I'd like to echo my colleagues and say thank you very much for inviting us here today. Just for those who wouldn't know, Women's Aid Federation are also a member of WRDA and work closely with them within all the communities of disadvantaged women and others. As you know, our work spreads across all communities, including this Stormont. So I'd like to say that I'm delighted to be here. That for me, there's a clear, and it's cited in your briefing paper, which was very comprehensive, unfinished business in terms of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and that is the commitment for women that they have the right to full and equal participation and political participation, and that just hasn't happened. And I think it's a collective, frankly, disgrace that we have this wonderful new Assembly, which we hope is going to keep going. And it's been ranked as 70th in the world in terms of women's participation. I think there are proven methods to do something about this, and if it isn't done, one can only assume there's an institutionalised bias against having women up here. And I say that because that is what women that I meet across my work say. Why are there not women there? Why are our issues not there in greater force? And I say that with respect as well to all of the men MLAs who do support our work. So it is excellent that this committee is looking at this, and we're delighted to see that happening. I'd like to just briefly refer the committee to the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They have a 6-step action plan. There's a very comprehensive report they have across all the Western Europe. And a lot of those 6 points have been echoed in what my colleagues are saying, and are echoed in other research which is being developed through Queen's and so on, a lot of which I'm sure has been put before you. But if not, we can certainly send it to the committee. And those points start with constitutional rights. And, thank God we have those. They're secured, we hope. Then there is the second point is the electoral system. Now, I see that is actually outside the brief of this committee, but I would just like to point out that is a proven method for getting women in, and it wasn't embedded within the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. But the reality is that without it, it is harder to get women in, because women are not in the traditional old boys networks. So things like regional lists actually get women into parliaments and assemblies. Then we have the issue of legal quotas, which is the third main plank, either to reserve seats for women or to have gender quotas. Now, I know that can be a very contested matter in this community, but I would have to say, if we look at the success of the outworkings of Patton, of what happened with our own police service, of how they are working with the community, they certainly work incredibly well with Women's Aid across Northern Ireland, of how welcome they are in most communities. It's a success, because instead of waiting for the 100 years where the tide will turn, you know, the room will get warm for everyone, we took action. The reality is that politics, the way it's structured now, is a cold house for women. That's, you know, a catchphrase for it on all sorts of levels, attitudinal levels, structural levels, matters around recruitment and selection of candidates. You need to take a step change. And for people who would say that that means you're discriminating against men, what I would say is that you are asking some men, yes, to realise they have to step aside. Because if you actually want 50% of women in here, it means there will be less men in here. That's the reality. I would also say that I'm quite confident that across the whole women's sector, if the situation was reversed and there were 22 men up here, I'd be calling for quotas for men, and we would be, because what we want is balance. That's what we need to actually have a good, sound government. Then there's the matter of reviewing party rules, which Lynn has touched on the recruitment procedures. And I think, obviously, this committee cannot, you know, legislate that into parties, but it could strongly recommend it. And there could be a kind of shame and blame culture, if you like, that it is no longer acceptable not to have women on lists going forward for winnable seats. And the fifth point is around capacity development, again, being touched on by my colleagues, about mentoring programmes, skills, training, funding for women candidates. All of these are incredibly important. I would just add a rider to that, to the effect that I wouldn't like anyone to go away thinking that women in general don't have an appetite for politics. They do. It's evidenced every day across all the communities, where there's such strong community development work, often led by women. In my own area of work, which is around support for victims of sexual and domestic violence, women, when they're in that long enough in that role, get very political and very angry about what isn't being done in their community. That's political to me, and they're the issues we want to see up here in greater numbers and in more depth. And the last thing, again, has been touched on with my colleagues, is parliamentary reform. And that can be about facilities, working conditions, hours of sitting is very important. I'd say that applies to political parties as well, not always asking women to come out at tea time when the kids are looking for their dinner or whatever. And childcare facilities. Some of these things have happened in Scotland and in Wales, but they're kind of absent here. What I would say, sometimes, because I totally appreciate there are many men up here who are champions of our work and also of gender equality, they often feel that you are accusing them personally of wanting to discriminate against women. And in some cases, there will be embedded old notions and they need to be unearthed. But in a lot of cases, it is simply that they don't recognise the kind of attitudinal and normal behaviour. If you get if you get a room and it's mostly men, there's a certain atmosphere. It's the same if you get a room and it's mostly women. You're acting within that without even realising that you're actually making it a bit complicated for the 2 or 3 women here in the room. Same thing would apply, you know, if people are coming from another ethnic background. They're the things that need challenged. And you can't challenge them yourself. You actually have to listen to people who are nailing it and saying, well, this is why that's uncomfortable, or that joke would make women feel uncomfortable, and all the rest of it. And then finally, I would just say that in terms of the issues, again, as I said, there are many people who are helping us champion domestic and sexual violence issues, but often it can start slipping unless we in Women's Aid and in civic society, if you like, keep pushing it and pushing it. And we have seen within Scotland and Wales, and the tremendous number of women they have in their parliaments and assemblies, that those issues don't slip, they get embedded. And I mean embedded with really large budgets, because at the end of the day, if money doesn't go where the policy priorities are, the work isn't going to get done. They're the sorts of issues that it has, again, lots of research there say if women get into parliaments, the bread and butter issues, those issues that really affect the communities, get higher up the agenda. That's got to be a big win for everyone. So some of those matters cannot be waved away with a magic wand by yourselves. We appreciate that. But it is more than just can one woman somewhere become an MLA. This is a whole business about how we run society and how we make it truly democratic. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Alan and Annie, for your very robust presentation there. I'm going to throw it open to questions in a minute. I would just like to say that I believe most people here would like to see a greater representation from women in the Assembly. There may be disagreement on how we bring that about, but what this committee is doing at the minute is we're studying other institutions, the likes of Wales that you have mentioned, and Scotland. We're also looking at Finland and Iceland, which have much higher representations of women in their assemblies or parliaments. So at least we're looking at the issue, and hopefully something positive will come out at the other end. I'd just like to ask you, Lynn, because you mentioned the issue of job sharing, I just wanted you to expand on that a bit. Are you talking about, for example, if someone is elected as an MLA, that they could share that role? Say it was a man elected, that you could bring a woman in to share that role?
I mean, this has come to my attention. It's been something that has always been around as an idea, but it's come to my attention more recently in terms of someone who was hoping to run for, I think it was for the Labour Party over in GB, and they didn't run because they have a disability, and they knew that they would have to job share, but that didn't really exist. I think that there's probably various ways you could run it, but I suppose what in terms for the electorate and democracy and all of that it would need to be that two people run for one seat. So you would have to have a twin, two people running for one position, from obviously from the same party, and that's the way it would work. And I know that in the past people have said, but sure, that can't work. But my question would always be, why could that not work? And it does allow people that either have other responsibilities outside of here, or that maybe it can't work full time.
Okay. Right,
just on that issue, some votes are party votes, other votes are issues of conscience, and if it was an issue of conscience, which of the two people on a job share would be able to exercise their right of vote of conscience? I mean, there's practical steps or things that could cause a difficulty. I'm just trying to see how would you practically deal with such a scenario?
I think that's a question that's very, very far down the line, because most votes actually happen in terms of that it's party votes. So you would have to, it's like job sharing possibly in any scenario, in that you would have to have people that are able to work together, because that's the way the situation works. But I mean, that as an issue or a problem is quite far down the line. Or you could go half and do fractions. You could possibly do it that way.
Seems very, very complicated.
It wouldn't. I don't think it would be something that would immediately negate the idea.
Okay. Sorry, Trevor, I'm going to bring Paul in before you, because he has to leave.
Can I apologise, because I was late here and I have to go again because there's justice legislation going through and I need to be in the chamber for that. But very quickly, and obviously I know the work of your organisation well, and you've came to the Justice Committee on a number of occasions, and obviously our party's making great strides in advancing female candidates and being successful and having them elected. But the issue of women's rights can't just be advanced obviously by female politicians, and I know Lord Morrow's taking through a bill that your organisation's been very supportive of. So how do you deal with trying to advance the issues that are important to you and your organisation whenever you have often, and on this particular issue, there are some female politicians that are very opposed to what your organisation believes in?
Well, that is indeed always the case, and issues don't always divide according to gender by any means. And as I said, we really appreciate the support we get from the male MLAs who take forward a lot of our issues. If you look at it in the round, what has happened, certainly in Scotland and Wales, is that where you have a greater mass of women MLAs, you will find some of those issues are just higher up the agenda. In terms, for example, of domestic and social, sexual violence. Now, there still may be differences within that as to how to take it forward, but the actual issues themselves get more prominence. And then there can be the same, political disagreements across the women and across the parties as there would be. But on some of those issues, I would say we are very fortunate in the domestic and sexual violence field that there's a lot of cross-party support. However, when you get, for example, to the issue of Lord Morrow's bill, how prostitution is perceived in society and so on, there can be differences based on, moral ethics, how you view human rights and so on, and that is going to still be a matter for political debate. I'd say, though, if you had a greater mass of women in here, you'd have more support for the position Lord Morrow has taken that we support.
Thank you. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate that.
Trevor?
We get a lot of figures here, you know, around the level of representation, which is clearly appalling up here, and the level of interest in politics around the world, you know, from women. I notice in Ireland, Southern Ireland, the level is particularly poor, if it can be believed, you know. But if you take it right back to basics here, I don't know what other parties do, but if somebody wants to be a candidate in our party, they submit their name to headquarters. They have to be a party member. That's vetted, it's sent back to the local association, and they select the candidates, whether it's council, MLA, or even MP. I have no figures here for the level of female membership of political parties, not representation. I mean actual membership, voting membership. It does seem to me that, I had a quick look at our membership list one time, and it's not so much that it's heavily dominated by men as the fact that men's wives don't appear to join. The men join the party, but the wife doesn't, or the partner doesn't. And if you had a situation where there was a greater female membership within political parties, and you're not talking about huge numbers in any of the parties, well then surely that would feed through and it would evolve into more female candidates, which you would think with a higher female membership, if you want to vote that way, would bring forward more female representatives. I must tell you this before I stop, that about 20 years ago we tried to introduce quotas for female on selection lists. It was voted down at the specific request of our female membership. They wouldn't have it. They said, no way, it's merit or nothing. I think we've got beyond that now, but just have you any thoughts about all that?
Sorry,
No, go ahead.
It's just something that just when you were speaking at the beginning in terms of, you know, people coming forward, and I do think some people do come forward. However, I think that from my speaking to such a variety of people who are politicians, that I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Most people are asked. Most people in the party, in any of the parties, are actually asked to run. It's just something that it's just the way that the situation works. Some come forward, and I'll say this again, I mean, I thought that there was something that was very specific to maybe the women in political parties, but I don't think that. I think that it's actually specific to men as well. It's just that they're not, maybe they position themselves better and they're not maybe asked as much. So even by growing the number of women in the party, and I know that there's research that is done on this in terms of Claire McGing from Maynooth, that she has those figures in relation to party membership across Northern Ireland parties, that it doesn't necessarily follow through that women will come through, because I think they need to be asked a few times.
Other women could ask them. I mean, I'm not being facetious here, but I think if you had it's referred to here as critical mass, it would feed through eventually. I don't think it's something you can just cure overnight, you know.
Yeah, but I do think that you have to realise that there is an uneven playing field here. You know, that may work, but there would have to be other things put in place as well. You know, like number one, the position of women in society, you know, as carers, you know, looking after families. You know, maybe that's why so many men are involved in politics, because they have, you know, they have partners, you know, who are looking after them and looking after the home. You know, women who you know, who haven't been involved, you know, in even in community action. You know, there's a lack of confidence there. You know, it's going back to what Lynn said as well about, and Annie, about, you know, that there needs to be resources there in terms of, you know, they invest in women, you know, to build up their confidence so that they feel that they could actually take that extra step, you know. But it's certainly a very uneven playing field.
I'm entirely with you in terms of facilities and resources being put in place in places like this to make it easier for parents to involve themselves and maybe improve their confidence and putting themselves forward, that there would be childcare facilities and all the rest of it, and proper timings, and and so on. I mean, it's not just the women would like to see decent timings up here, believe me. But they still say that, you know, back at the basic level, who goes forward for selection? Now, you say most people are asked. I'd say that's true. You know, you display a bit of talent if the party comes to you, or you don't display a bit of talent, but the party still comes to you and asks you would you like to stand. I don't see why that shouldn't apply to men any more so than ladies.
Well, what I'd say to that is that I think that if you put yourself in the position, those of you who are men, in that room where most of your party officers are probably going to be men, where things have been done a certain way for a long time, and where no one has approached you, and there's a few eager and probably, you know, potentially good candidates who are men who already have their hands up in the air saying publicly that they want to do it, you're not going to be the one that's chosen, and you could be the one who would make the better MLA. So it has to be, I think, more managed than that. I'd say parties have to take responsibility. If you don't have a gender audit about who your membership is, how many women and men you have, you need to look at that. You know, you need to look at what your processes are. It's the same the way we've changed now about selection for jobs. It isn't just somebody who knocks on your door and says, I want to do that job. You know, there's a criteria, you go through an interview. All that has to be done, and done also by people who are independent and who aren't, you know, trying to get the favoured sort of person in. I think parties have, you know, should be doing that as well as the rest of society. It shouldn't be this kind of casual approach.
Yeah. Well, we're agreeing with you
Yeah.
on that point. But as I say, it's the parties that have the basic responsibility here to do something about it.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. Katrina?
Margaret, look, you're very welcome. And I have to say, I just want to put on record my admiration for the work that each of you, personally and also your organisations, have done over the last, I think the first time I met you, Anne, was probably about 30 years ago. Would that be right? Yeah. Secondly, there isn't a thing you've said that I don't agree with. It isn't an easy place to be. I'm not going to pretend it is. I noticed a couple of people's eyes light up when you talked about job sharing. It'll be lovely. But just in terms of, there was a couple of queries that you raised. One was and your presentation was very focused with a clear knowledge of how we operate here. So just in terms of the Gender Action Plan, I'm a member of the Assembly Commission, and I've asked for the Gender Action Plan in relation to the Assembly Commission. We've also proposed this investigation or inquiry or whatever we're calling it, and I believe this is one of the most important things that this committee will do. I think it's very, very important. I think we have to, it's not enough to say we just want people to put themselves forward, and I know no one in this room is saying that. I think parties have to be proactive in terms of setting quotas at every single level of their party. Otherwise, nothing will ever change. Nobody gives up power, no matter how progressive a party is. Nobody. So I do believe we need very strong quotas internally, and I know when I sat on the Ard Corlia, if panels were coming to me with all men, I was one of the voices saying that needs to go back. Where's the women? And actually, I think it needs to go further than individual parties. I think what needs to happen is, and we'll study what happens to legislation in the South, but there's legislation in the South that there's actually financial penalties for parties, and that's when parties start listening. They don't like losing money. So I think we need to look at that. Though at the moment, it's just a percentage of candidates I'd like to see winnable seats, because that's the way we're going to get changes. I think we need the debate and the discussion, because there's probably much more common ground between all the parties, because it's good for politics to have women in politics. It's not good. This place at the moment is not good for politics, and it's not good for women in politics. And the message that you're absolutely right, aggressive, adversarial, and very male, and older. And we need to try and change that, and we have to be proactive in doing that. So I certainly look forward to working with you. We don't have all the answers. And what I would say is, it's great women being in the community, but often the decisions are being made here. So I'd throw a challenge back to community and say, we need women like you in politics. And that's a big step, and I know, because I was in your situation in the community sector, and it was the biggest step I made in my life. But we need strong women from the community sector across all different backgrounds coming forward, and particularly women in disadvantaged areas. So that's a challenge I'm going to throw out to the community sector as well.
Can I just ask on the back of that? I noticed that in your presentation, there's a comment that women maybe don't naturally find a place within one particular political party. Is there evidence for that?
Well,
I don't think that we should assume that that all women think the same. And I think that in the past there was certainly a role for the women's coalition in terms of saying that there needs to be more women involved in politics. But to think that all women should be part of one, political party.
No.
I think
Party of their choice. I mean, the comment is reluctance of women to adhere, represent one particular party, versus difficulty in being heard outside the current party system. Well, I think realistically, any potential candidate, let's say for up here, who aspires to be an MLA, is going to have to connect themselves to a party.
oh yeah.
Male or female doesn't really matter. It's your notes here seem to be saying that women have difficulty with that.
well, there is evidence of that in some of the workshops and so on, that women, don't actually want to get into what is left of the old divisive politics, and therefore some of them find themselves reluctant to enter into one of the traditional parties, if you like, who are up here at the moment. They actually want to forge new ground in terms of the bread and butter issues. Not saying for all of them, but some of them obviously are clear supporters of clear parties, but it's part of that shifting of the agenda, I suppose, toward what we share, what we can go forward on, and what our real problems are, the financial and all the rest of it. We're not trying to say all women,
But I don't think women would like to be boxed off and put in the one party.
No.
I think that women's views, are representative of all of the parties that exist.
Yeah, but you don't. When you gravitate towards a political party, it doesn't mean that you. I'm choosing my words carefully. Agree with every single item in their manifesto. You choose the one which most suits you. And that's the same for men as for women.
Yeah.
So I don't buy that particular thing, that women have a problem with effectively selecting a party. And you mentioned the Women's Coalition. That was a good effort, but then what happened to it?
Well, it
like having a men's
had its day. It achieved its objective, I believe.
Oh.
It's maybe not as relevant as it is, now, as it was then.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
it was formed for a specific purpose, which we feel we achieved.
But
But I would also put that challenge back in terms of what Katrina mentioned. How many parties are actively recruiting in disadvantaged areas? Have you asked those women to join your party? Because actually, I don't know a lot of women who actually get asked.
well, the people who, sorry, Chairman, I can only speak for my own party. The people who join our party are not necessarily asked. They join on the back of particular issues or particular events. I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise to you after the flags protest of December a year ago. We recruited, I think, another 150 members in a few weeks, which was unprecedented for us. But I'm not taking anything of that issue. It was just the fact that, and a lot of those 150, a proportion of them, I'm sure, were women. So I mean, people are inspired into politics for different reasons, and sometimes they're asked. Of course, they are. Yeah.
Can I just come in on that point?
Yes, Gregory was next, but if Gregory's happy to give way.
You've nearly answered it all. It was something I was going to ask you later on. I know in my experience when I've been out speaking to a lot of the women's groups, a lot of them would bring up the point about what political party would I join? And I have tried to explain to them that everything that my party says and does and believes in is not necessarily everything but I believe in the ethos of my party, I believe in the general principles of my party, and that's what attracted me to my party. But there will be the odd thing that'll come up where I'll go, actually, no, I don't agree with that, and I don't even want to go and vote on that, but I have to, and that's part of being a member of a party. But do you think that there's something wrong, or something that parties could be doing more? Because all of our parties very much are the issues that are on the ground, but sometimes that doesn't get reflected out there. You know, when people see the news at night or they're watching the Stormont TV programmes, whatever it might be, it's big constitutional issues a lot of the time, a lot of issues to do with parity, a lot of issues to do with flags, whatever it might be, but they're not actually, the media is not portraying all of those other issues that we discuss at committee level, that we discuss in the chamber and various other meetings in this building, that are actually the issues that affect those men and women that live in all areas of our communities. And I think it's the parties maybe are at fault here for not putting that out a bit more, and for not putting that message out a bit more, that actually, no, that's the issues we are discussing, that's the issues that are important to us. You know, albeit that all you hear over TV are the big issues. The small issues are the important ones, because they're the ones that we build on. They're our bedrock, they're what we come from. That's what all our political parties were formed on, were those issues. So I think there's a job of work for us as political parties to get those women in, you know, because I know when they speak to me, they'll say, oh, but your party are more interested in this, or another party there do that. And I'm going, no, that's not what we're about, that's not what we discuss. You know, we discuss education, we discuss health, all the issues that affect you, you know. And so I think there's a bit of work to be done by political parties, and probably a better education system. But I'll come to that after, when it's my turn to come in.
I agree with you, Paula, and I think that, you know, there's an onus on, you know, probably more so on, you know, female, you know, like politicians to be engaging, you know, with communities and doing what you have done, you know, in terms of our organisation, you know, coming out and speaking, you know, about no peace without women, and, you know, 1325 and that. And I think sort of being, you know, engaging in a very sort of, you know, down to earth way, you know. And I think that and the feedback that we got from that conference at the end of June was that, you know, that there are, it's not just the big issues that you're hearing about, you know, in the TV, you know, and the constitutional issues and that, you know. It is the bread and butter issues, and that's what I think, you know, our membership, you know, want to hear, that is important. Those issues are important.
Okay, Gregory?
Yeah, there's just a couple of things I'd like your view on. You said, and a couple of other MLAs, it raised the issue of the adversarial nature of politics. And I can see that it's very, very clear that would be off-putting, and that's been there for quite some time. But what I would like your view on is, if you look at that and accept that, and I think most people do, you would imagine that the converse would be true. That when there are occasions, which there have been in the comparatively recent past, when it appeared to the wider public that adversarial politics was going to be replaced by a more all-embracing political life, you would expect more women to come forward, just as there weren't more whenever it was adversarial. Whether you look at 1998 or 2007, would you not have expected at that stage, when it would appear adversarial politics was going to recede, that more women would come forward? But that doesn't seem to happen.
I'm not sure. That wouldn't be my view, that at both those times that adversarial politics actually have receded. I think that it's still very much alive and well.
But was the view not that it was going to happen? That's what I mean. In 98 and in 07, there was a wider community view that the old sort of punch and judy politics was receding because agreements had been reached. Would you not then expect more women to get involved if the reason for them not being involved was the adversarial politics, which they then saw on their television and read in the newspapers? They felt, whatever about what happened afterwards, at that point they felt, well, then those days are over, therefore I want to get involved. But that didn't seem to happen.
But I think what people and women see on their television is that it still is adversarial. And I mean, there have been a number of occasions over the last few years where, in our assembly and in our chamber, personal attacks are seen as okay, and often to women from men, and that's seen as okay, and it's not necessarily seen as okay, let's say, in Westminster. So the perception, and it's coming back on what you were saying as well, Paula, because I think the media have some, a stage here as well, because they want to report on what's sensational and not bread and butter. But what we see on our televisions is generally the adversarial nature that still exists today, and that's what the public see. So that would come across in all the work, in terms of the community development work that we do with women, that would be one of the huge turn-offs. So that corner, I don't believe, has been turned.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to press a point, Chairman. The only point I would make is that what you're talking about is what has happened subsequent to those dates. I was talking about at the time, just the way, whether it was in South Africa or elsewhere, there were millions of people queued up to vote because at that time, it doesn't matter what happened afterwards, at the time they felt this is a new dawn, therefore we're queuing up. Millions of us are going to queue because it's a different era. But the only point I'm making was, in 98 or in 07, you would imagine then, not what happened afterwards, not 6 months later when there was a row, or 2 years or 10 years, but then I would have expected to see more women getting involved. At that time, maybe they get turned off afterwards because some of the adversary, but however, you're giving your explanation.
Just to come in briefly on that, I mean, I certainly think that when the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was signed, and in 1998, there was a huge wave of hope, and a lot of women wanted to be involved. Now, from my perspective, two things happened. In the Good Friday Agreement, the electoral system that was agreed for this Assembly was the old one, and that was not going to bring more women in. So although those arguments had been made to those who were making the deal, they were not heard. We didn't get the regional lists. And, as a point of fact, was one of the reasons that led to the demise of the Women's Coalition, although they got a couple of members in originally. So that was a big thing. The second thing was that, come 2002, and we had the legislation in Westminster about selection of candidates and so on. Although it can be applied here, it wasn't applied. Nothing structural was done to actually bring those women in who did want in. So it wasn't, the fault of the women that they didn't want in. They wanted in, but the doors weren't opened for them. And I think the potential is still there, that there are women out there who would want into this Assembly and who aren't going to get in under the current setups.
Although prior to the 98 agreement, there was, for one system in the Northern Ireland Forum for Political Dialogue, a list system.
Yes, there was. And that was how the smaller loyalist parties got in, and also the Coalition and the Labour.
But we didn't see a big increase of females, despite using the list system.
Well, actually, it led to the fact that the Coalition were at the table. We wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for that regional list system.
Yeah, but numerically, out of the numbers in the forum, it didn't show a big increase. But however,
and that's then down to the parties who weren't putting the women forward.
Some of them.
It's a shared.
Just on the issue of young people, I see in the paper you said, and I can see, why it would be said, young women don't see the relevance of politics in their lives. They see politics as full of conflict, which goes back to the adversarial issue. Young women don't know how to get into politics, and young women feel disengaged from politics. I just, again, want your view. I would spend quite a bit of time either doing visits to schools, either 6th or upper 6th, and even in higher education in terms of sort of 18 to 22-year-olds. And media studies and different groups like that. And I find that in those groups, that age group between 17 and sort of 21, that the more active people in the room are female, much more active than the young men. So I'm just wondering, is that your experience? And if it is, what is it that is vibrant and active about a 17 and 21-year-old group that seems to dissipate? Is it family responsibilities, or what is it beyond the 21 age group that then means that people who, it appears to me, and the hundreds that I've seen, are very, very active, vibrant, very up and at them for change, young females, and that doesn't translate into political action?
I think that probably is, what happens in life generally. It's not just political life, and I think that we have a lot of young women and young men, but young women are politically active, I suppose, when they're at that age where they're leaving education, moving into higher education or further education. But then what happens is life happens. And life happens to them when they move into work, and life happens to them if they want to move into politics. And there just are certain structural barriers that face females. And we had this discussion before we were coming in, for example, where still the largest amount of complaints made to the Equality Commission are in terms of maternity discrimination, with all the legislation that exists. And I think, so that's one part of it, but there are structural kind of issues and barriers facing young women as they move into their 20s and beyond. And I mean, something, again, I suppose from a woman in politics who spoke to me a number of years ago, was talked about how she was a councillor and hanging on by her fingernails, as she was rearing her kids at that time. And this was a time during, I suppose, when the conflict was on here as well. But that's what they do. You hang on with your fingernails. Then the kids grow up, and then you can kind of re-immerse yourself in that life. And I think what you're talking about is just process all kind of life in terms of how women move forward.
Okay.
Can I just say, as a rider to that as well, we're now faced in Northern Ireland with the move to the super councils and so on, which, is timely, we needed to do, but actually that's going to increase the gender gap. And there has been no positive action taken to ensure those councils were going to be gender balanced. And they will undoubtedly be the training grounds for the Assembly. And, that's the normal way it should be. And it's as if people are just sleepwalking into just maintaining the gender gap in terms of who is here and what their gender is in terms of being in the Assembly.
Yep. Sean?
That's just the point I was going to come on to, because, in many of our community groups and whatever, the women are the most active part of it. But there seems to be then a block even in getting women into local government, never mind anything else. What more can we do to build capacity, just not alone within our own political parties, but within communities, for women to make that step from community activities to local government activities?
Well, there's the range of the capacity development issues, and they don't all have to be done at the same time, but things like mentoring, sessions, particularly for women who are thinking of doing it, basically, encouragement and support. There can be a lot of information which is held within a small group, say within a party, and again, you may not even realise that it is only you or 6 other people who know all this, or people who have had the time to be in your company a lot, that you're sharing that information and making sure that the women you're asking to come forward will feel that they're going to be supported in the role. There's funding issues. There's the issues about, when are you choosing to call those meetings so that it doesn't clash with the main points of childcare, those matters. And then, staying with it, as Lynn said, the fact that you don't say immediately when someone asks you does not mean that you will not be a good MLA. It could mean that you are a thoughtful person who's actually considering the matter and considering how can you balance it all. So don't give up on the first 1 or 2 asks. I'm sure there's others there.
Could I say as well, though, that there was an initiative taken in 2006, Women in Local Councils Making a Difference. And it looked at, it wasn't just getting, women to, come into as local councillors, but it looked at the councils, the overall, gender balance in terms of the, the number of women in middle management positions as chief executives. So, you can't really, I think you can't You know, you can't sort of like push in terms of getting women to be, you know, into local government. You have to look at the structure that they're coming into, you know. So it's a bit like, you know, you have to warm the place up, you know, and you have to deal with sort of like a number of issues in terms of gender, rather than just, you know, just having sort of the objective of getting, you know, women, you know, more women as local councillors. And that was an initiative that was supported by all political parties, and it was actually quite successful.
Wasn't something like that done quite recently in the south of Ireland, in terms of getting more women involved in?
There's new legislation brought in.
Yeah.
And there was a group called Women for Election that, that delivered training, and a lot of the new women who have moved in,
right.
and they actually went through that process, their training, and it's like almost like a support network. It was highly successful.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose that, you know, for me as well, looking at the balance we have in the Assembly at the moment, unless a critical mass of the male MLS sign up to really push this forward, it's not going to happen. But you know, there aren't enough women to leave it to just the women here. You actually need to get men in all the parties who are going to make this a priority issue.
Okay, thanks for, sorry, Roy wanted to come back in there again. Sorry.
Just at the tail end there, you mentioned highly successful training initiative that had been, I think it was down south that you were talking about. Certainly training, I think, is very, very important, but that it should happen at all levels. To encourage women to sometimes just become active in their local community association or whatever informal community bodies there are. That makes them more likely to have the confidence to step forward as a councillor and be successful. Again, having a network behind. And similarly, people do not, very few people come out of the blue and suddenly become an MLA or become an MP. Usually there is either a community background or a council background. So my question is, in terms of training at each of those levels, at community involvement, at upskilling women councillors, what currently exists in Northern Ireland? Mention was made of democracy, so what currently exists, what would you like to see, and can you tell me something more about this successful model that you mentioned in the Republic of Ireland?
Well, the Women for Election, I'm trying to remember, I think maybe started, it's a number of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and was funded through a charitable trust. And essentially what they did was they travelled around the country in the south of Ireland, running workshops, inspiring potential politicians and political parties, I think, put their women forward. But in the mix with that, and a parallel kind of process, was that the quotas were coming in as well. So there was an onus then in terms of the political parties had to ensure that they were going to have 30% of their candidature. That was another kind of, I suppose, push, that 30% of their candidates were going to be women, and then this was another kind of process in terms of training them. So I think it happened at weekends. I think current female councillors and TDs participated in that, and then started mentoring aspiring politicians within that process. So it just became quite holistic and was very, very successful. And there have been, and I know that the women who run that programme, it's now more of a social economy private enterprise, have been up in the Assembly on a number of occasions when these things have been discussed. But it certainly might be something that you would want to maybe talk to them about how that actually works, because it's been very, very successful. And if I could just say, because I'm sure it has been mentioned, but just in case it hasn't, I cannot overemphasise enough the importance of networks and support. And I think that those kind of, like Women for Election, those kind of supports and democracy and those things that happened, it's about women knowing that they're supported even across parties. They're just being supported by women who are in the same position as themselves. And the men's networks exist already, and women's really don't at the moment. And I think that that's very, very important.
And can you tell us something more about what is currently in place, if anything, and what you see the particular gaps are?
I don't know that there's any live projects at the moment, and apart from, I don't think so. There's bits and bobs happen, like periodically. Women in Public Life, a project happened up in the northwest. and with Scotland, but since then I am not aware of anything that is particular to training women in politics. The most recent would have been the work that was happening with Politics Plus. I'm not sure that I mean, resources have continually been an issue ever since the 1990s, as far as I'm aware.
Skills and so on are there. It's just a case, a case of commissioning the work.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are skills, but sometimes there still needs to be that confidence built into an individual who may already, I mean, I know some people I consider to be, for instance, excellent potential councillors, but you need to encourage, and sometimes that little bit of extra training can just give them that confidence to step forward. Mr. Chairman, I think we as a committee should be trying to do some further research through the Assembly Library to try and find out what actually is in place at present. So we have a clear picture in this area, because I think this is a very, very important area.
Well, what I did mean actually was that the skills are there in terms of there's organisations such as Democracy. You could absolutely put together good programmes and have them there. It's a case of just, calling for them to help do exactly what you're saying, build the skills and the potential candidates.
Paula, you wanted to come
Yeah,
back in?
just on the back of that, I know in the 1990s when I first was a member of the DUP, we did a democracy course. Brona Hines ran it, and that was where I actually met Pam Cameron for the first time, and it was actually DUP female members, and it was one of the most worthwhile courses I ever did to do with politics. It really made us think, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we could be part of this, albeit it did take me 6 or 7 years before I actually put my name on a ballot paper. But, it was extremely worthwhile. And I know there's a big job of work to do with the community and people who are not in political parties and getting them involved. And that's something we have to take on as political parties. But there's a big job as well to do with females already involved. Because Gregory and I were just talking earlier and saying we know within our own party we have a big female membership, we have a large female membership, but yet we're not getting them even to come through. So I think it's something we need to definitely look at is and for political parties as well, for their female membership, the likes of Democracy, and even to learn the whole systems. And I find it so interesting and really encouraged me then to think, yeah, that's something that I could possibly do. And I know we had the debate in the chamber not too long ago that Megan had brought forward that we would look at, or not look at, but it was passed that we would bring in some sort of education or something in. So we maybe need to follow up on that to find out where we've gone with that, because it was passed through the House in a motion that we would look at women's participation and training for women across the board. So it's something that we need to maybe pull that out again and have a look and see where we are. But definitely that type of training is so beneficial, and things you remember. And and I remember even at the time, even years later, you were still able to phone up Brona and say, can you help me with this, or what do I do about those networks that you formed. And I think we're getting better with our networks as women. We see each other quite frequently. And you see each other at different events, and every time you see each other, speak to each other, it's a wee bit more encouraging. We're a wee bit more further forward. We haven't taken big strides, I know that, but it's moving forward and it's getting forward. And it's the likes of your organisations and other organisations like you, that women like myself and other female politicians, that is our network. That's where we know they're the people we can rely on, to get a message out and to put it across to the rest of the community. But we are, I think we shouldn't lose heart. We're moving forward, we're moving in the right direction. Sometimes we beat ourselves up a wee bit at how bad it all is. It isn't, and it will improve. I believe that.
Okay, thanks very much, ladies. It's been one of the longest sessions that I can remember of giving evidence. So, I think that shows a level of interest that there is there. There's a lot of work to be done, but as Paula says, she's optimistic about the future, and I think most of us would be. I think there has to be change, and hopefully there will be change. So thanks very much for coming along.
Could I just say, Chairperson, thank you very much for being given the opportunity to come here and represent your views. And we would really urge this committee at the conclusion of the review to take bold, decisive action and to bring that critical mass of women into the Assembly. And as women, we hope that will happen.
Okay. You know, we can only make recommendations. We don't really have the power to make change. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just Roy made a proposal there earlier that we should engage the Assembly research people
On
to...
current programmes and previous ones, I think it's a key area. We need more facts.
Okay.
If I pick that up right, that would be focused in terms of Northern Ireland and what happens in Northern Ireland, but also in this island, and maybe examples of good practice slightly further afield. Our researcher is present hearing this at the moment. Thank you.
Chair, could I say that, the education, that's very important, but the other aspect is very important, is actually how the different assemblies facilitate women. Hopefully they would, as part of the research, they would look at that.
Just through the chair, I have over the summer got some information. I will bring it to committee on what is happening within this organisation, within the Secretariat led by the MLAs in the Secretariat. For example, Politics Plus and other initiatives and other opportunities and events which encourage women into politics. And I'll bring that information forward to the next committee meeting.
Right.
But Sean says they were to take a look at what exactly is happening in the Assembly. I accept that's an important area, but I think it's equally important to look at all the other stepping stones because people just don't suddenly become MLAs or MPs. There's an awful lot of networking and personal development, community development that can go on before they really have the skills, the full skills and confidence even to put themselves forward. So I think it's equally important to the community, the council, local government, as well as ultimately Assembly or Westminster.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 6, breakdown of the responses received to date from the call for evidence, and refer members to section 6, pages 29 to 48. All the responses to date have been summarised and included in the document. And just to let everyone know that 4 political parties represented on the committee have still to reply, and I would ask members to encourage their parties to respond as soon as possible. Yep. The only party that has responded is the Ulster Unionists. I'd like to ask the clerk to brief the committee on the outcomes of the call for evidence.
Yes. Very quickly, members, tables are there. You'll recall the call for evidence agreed by this committee was circulated way back on 7th of July with a closing date of 3rd of September. It was circulated not only to key stakeholder organisations, such as the organisations that were in front of us today, but also through the 3 main papers. The larger table in front of it it commences at page 29 right through to 46, attempts to provide a breakdown summary of the 15 responses received to date. These 15 responses are mainly from key stakeholder organisations, such as the 3 that were represented at committee today. There are other responses from academics, including Dr. Paul Cheney of Cardiff University, which 3 members benefited to meet during the visit to the Welsh Assembly, but also from Professor Yvonne Gallaghan from Queen's University, who's been in front of this committee more recently. Other responses were received from trade unions, the Equality Commission, the Human Rights Commission, and other key stakeholder organisations representing women. And as the chairperson said, the only political party to respond to date was the Ulster Unionist Party. The draft summary analyses all responses against the 6 questions asked in the call for evidence paper. Those are set out at the top of the table, and the summaries attempt to highlight in bold the key points made by the responses. The second table, which starts at page 47 to 48, attempts to identify the key issues arising from the 15 responses to date, and again set out against the questions. Now, it's clear that these tables set out a whole set, and exemplified very well today, a whole set of proposals and ideas and points that are coming through from stakeholder organisations on this. The question is for the committee chair that how will the committee manage to prioritise and focus and keep in or scope in on exactly which areas of actions that the committee may want to make proposals and recommendations in its forthcoming report towards the end of the year. And an option for committee to think about, and indeed is some kind of half-day event, hopefully in Parliament buildings, perhaps towards the end of October, when we have a full set of responses. That might take the form of, the object with that would be to give further analysis and focus, but also to hear, as members did this morning, directly from women. Committee Secretariat could have some thoughts on this based on the evidence received to date, and can bring a paper forward on this. As I say, with the emphasis, and there's been some discussion about the examples from local government and initiatives on training, it can be that those discussion groups would be separated out into areas such as that. So the Local Government Staff Commission, I know, have experienced and have a lot of ideas on bringing forward women into local government. I know that there are initiatives which have been taken and are being worked up at central government level in terms of with MDFM. There are lots of positive initiatives which could be taken forward, and we could get a speaker to give a context on that, and then a roundtable discussion group, not only including the stakeholders that responded to the call for evidence, but also MLAs within this committee, and perhaps right across the Assembly invites could be given, so that the message of this inquiry could be spread at that point. So that would be a half day, or perhaps a little bit more, of a seminar. And Chair, it's for members to discuss if Secretariat bring that forward, that proposal.
Okay, members want any clarification on that? Have any questions or wish to make comments?
No, I think it's a good idea, and I think the more participation we have, the better. Any ideas?
And you're not in agreement to that, Paula?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7. It has been suggested we may want to move into closed session for this issue, where section 7, page 50 to 70. I'll take advice from members on this issue.
The forthcoming trip to Iceland.
Another proposal?
Yeah.
Why do we want to move to closed session? Just curious.
Well, I don't want to move to closed session. There's a suggestion that because of the expense involved in this trip, that it may attract some adverse publicity.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the
Section 7, page 50 to 70, and I'll ask the clerk to brief the committee on the draft visit programme.
Yes, the draft visit programme is there. I can do a quick summary of that. the logistics of this work out that it's 3 days, and it takes up 3 days of the members' time who are participating in this visit, the study visit. But it's 1.5 days on the ground as such, having an opportunity to talk to key people in Iceland on this. The facts and figures in terms of the success of Iceland and the Icelandic government and all its organisations in advancing women and giving equality there are set out in the papers. Just to give a quick reflection on the programme and when the committee arrives on the 24th, the representative committee, there is a meeting with the Minister for Social Affairs and Housing, Minister for Welfare, who's the key person responsible for the Gender Action Programme and gender equality, including legislation within the Icelandic government. Then there's perhaps an opportunity to have dinner with that minister if the minister's time is available. Moving swiftly into the Thursday morning for early. The first meeting will be with the Judicial Affairs and Education Committee. Again, it is responsibility for holding the Minister to account and monitoring and looking at equal rights and in terms of gender. There is an organisation called the Centre for Gender Equality, which is lined up mid-morning on the 25th, and that has a responsibility for bringing forward, it's rather like the Equality Commission, to bring forward recommendations and policy recommendations to the Minister and the Government to advance the equality issue in terms of gender there. At 12 o'clock, you'll see we have an informal working lunch with political parties. These are the main political parties, all of which have adopted voluntary quota provision. That's a point of interest. It's a voluntary quota position, and how that works. It'll be a round table with the representatives from those parties, so an opportunity to have formal and informal discussions there. Moving on into, quickly after that working lunch, into a meeting with the Icelandic Women's Rights Association, again very heavily into directing and influencing policy and advancing policy in women's rights in Iceland. We have a mid-afternoon, although it's not confirmed, we've been trying to get a meeting with the Minister for the Interior in Iceland, she has direct responsibility for gender action at local government level, and we think there'll be very practical things which would come out of that. And finally, later in the afternoon, the Institute of Gender Equality difference of the University of Iceland. They haven't confirmed just quite yet, but I'm confident they will confirm that they will have a representative to meet the committee. Again, they're heavily into research and advancing the business of women in politics in Iceland. There. That's a quick snapshot. There's lots of briefing in there. There will be a full briefing pack going to members early next week who are participating on this, and we'll be in touch with the 7 members about the logistics of getting to airport early on Wednesday morning and coming back. Members will see the return journey is not an early morning, but a very early morning. That's just.
Do we get to bed that night?
Yes.
A few hours.
Yes. But it's just the logistics of getting back. We have to go via London. There's no alternative, and it's just the flights to get back in on the late afternoon rather than late evening on the Friday. So that means the early morning start, or the very early morning start on the Friday on that.
Give a clarification, is it a 4:45 at the airport or a 6:45 at the airport on the Friday morning, which we all agree to?
It's, if it's a 2-hour check-in, it's 4:45.
Oh, right.
Yeah, 4:45. And
before that,
we're 25 miles to
Well,
the
before
airport.
that,
So you can see the way the time is clicking
definitely
away.
not a jolly.
Sorry, Chair, I have to go because with the Speaker being ill, I have to chair the Business Committee. So, excuse me. But I think you've done a great programme there, so thank you.
It's certainly a very packed programme yet again, which is what we're there to do. And I'm just looking at some of the people we have to meet. It's going to be very interesting. It is very diverse as well.
All right, just one note of caution. There's another volcano in Iceland has become active again. You might end up stranded there for a few months.
This is aside from the one fortnight ago, is it?
No, it's that one. No, it's that one.
What's the ferry trips like?
There are none.
Cruise ship stuff.
Maybe do a position check on that. It did move from red to amber in terms of warning.
Or is this a fresh one rather than one that was
No,
reported
it's
two
no,
weeks
it's
ago?
the
same one simmering away. There.
Okay, if everyone's happy, then we'll move on to item 8, additional information relating to the review. Refer members to section 8, pages 72 to 78, where there are the following papers for members' information: a summary of the all-party parliamentary group, Women in Parliament, Westminster inquiry, into what could be done to create a more aspirational, modern and representative parliament, including actions for engaging with women. A BBC News report on women councillors and new super councils, and finally an item from the French Parliament regarding the new French Gender Equality Bill. That's for information. Agenda item 9, Forward Work Programme, is at section 9, pages 80 to 81. Ask members if they're content to approve this. Everyone happy?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other business? No. Next meeting will take place on Tuesday, the 7th of October, 10:30 a.m, room 21. Thanks very much.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly